Okay. You should allow me to sit and talk. I have a little bit of back pain. I've not been straining too much in the last several months, so to speak. Good morning to all of you. And first of all, let me thank Vinesh and, of course, my other colleagues at IIT Mumbai to invite me here for this consortia. Okay. Anyway, it's all right, I guess. So I was wondering what to speak about in a group where you have, from all functions of business, and, there may be people in economics, there may be people in strategy, finance, operations, marketing. Initially, I thought of a topic which is hardcore work which I am currently doing in what is called service-dominated logic. Then I decided not to do that because I wanted to give a larger benefit to all of you. Then I thought I must talk about publication. Partly because these 30 years of publication and being an editor and in the advisory boards of several international journals, a lot of things which has passed through me, I thought probably I will talk about that to you. Simply because I think you people are in some ways a little unfortunate because now everybody is trying to publish. 30 years back when I was doing PhD, we were only 3 of us in India doing on this topic and a handful in the world. That was the area in which I did my PhD. Publication was much easier. Things are very different now. I think it has added more and more complexities into the whole game. So I thought, let me just talk about the research process as such, which must lead to publication. Nobody wants to do research and then be with it without doing anything. I think research logically takes us to publication. So I wanted to talk about both these parts of the puzzle, more about publication, a little bit less about research. That's what I thought I will do today. Well, first of all, as you all know, academic life has certain nice things which you don't find elsewhere. And I think we should be very much aware of this because I keep hearing this all the time that, if you are in the teaching profession, some of your students get more salary than you. I think all those you need to just forget. There are very interesting things about the academic profession. The kind of things that we are talking here, I don't think any profession allows that much in an unfettered way. It's all about creativity. It's all about freedom. Enormous respect in the society. P.V. Indiresan, who was the director of IIT Madras when I was there, he used to say that an IAS officer is a government servant and a teacher is a master. He used to say that quite often. I think these are very valuable things about this profession. And it's very important for us to understand that if we need to be in academics, okay, the basic traits are a spirit of inquiry and flair for writing. This is extremely important. If we are not doing that, I think we are not going to do a great job in terms of academics. So this whole idea of publication and research are coming through this creativity, the spirit of inquiry, and this flair for writing, which are very, very important. Only then we make a very satisfying career in terms of being in the academics and so on. Well, let me first talk about how do we go about this whole process of doing some research and then finally we sort of end up with a nice publication, which is what we are all worried about. Individuals are worried about that. Institutions are very worried about that. Administrators are definitely worried about that. So I think all of us are on the same page in terms of this particular issue. Yeah. Well, research process, as we all know, starts with a certain problem definition. whether you write a paper post your PhD, whether you write a paper part of your PhD, whether you do your PhD work itself, I think the problem definition is the starting point for a research process that you start. And then, of course, you initiate some work and then some amount of abstraction. In some cases, it could be modeling. I was sitting through the previous session. I think many of the ideas that I'm going to share with you, I was seeing all those in the, that 4 papers which are being presented. I would like all of you to look at it once again with this kind of perspective. I didn't react much, but I guess there are issues which we should be quite conscious about. And of course, we get the results and insights. This is the first step of this whole journey, that if you don't get good insights from your work, I don't think there is a case for publication. It's going to be very tough. So I think the logical first step is, how do you define a problem? How do you sort of come with a nice methodology of analyzing it? And the proof of the pudding is in eating. Finally, the insights matter. In fact, I've been seeing in the last 25 years, in the last 10 years particularly, even a journal like Management Science is perfectly fine with very little maths. They are more interested in insights. So I think this asking for deeper insights, more useful things are going to be very, very important. I think all the 4 papers that was presented in the previous session, I think you must put this yardstick and then measure for yourself. Don't wait for a referee or somebody to measure. It's very important in publication. I'll come to it a little later. So once the research is done, then we talk about the second part, which is the publication process. There we have to understand, this is very important for us to understand. It's very important for us to understand that we should recognize there is a publishable seed. That's the job of the author. You can take somebody else's help, but you must understand that there is a publishable seed. Without that, it's not going to go. The seed has to germinate finally. So this is an acid test for the author himself or herself. You should ask, is there a publishable seed? How do you locate it? And what is the motivation for the paper? How do you gain the confidence of the people? The people, when I mean, is number one, it is the chief editor. Because I'm going to show you 80% is desk rejected today. The 80 to 82, 83% is desk rejection. You send the paper and then you get a letter saying thank you. So it starts there, then the referee, then the readers. These are the 3 constituencies which we should keep in mind when we write a paper. Then, of course, the core work and the research contribution. I'll elaborate on all of them in a little more detail so that we get a sense of what we are talking. In fact, the first thing that we need to understand is research is not, as people quite often think, one grand test. In fact, good research never happens like that. Good research, in my personal experience and opinion, starts with questions which may appear absolutely nonsense. That's the step 1 of a good research. And that's a way to start the research. You should do a very simple idea, very simple model, if it's a mathematical model, very simple model, or a very simple, apparently obvious kind of result, and one needs to start building on it. It's a journey in which you start with a lot of assumptions which you can manage, start unstripping the assumptions, sophisticate the work that you are doing, and then come up to a level. There's no point in just saying, I'll just go there. It doesn't happen like that. That journey is what gives us insights. The journey is what gives us confidence. So research is not one grand test of a model or an idea. It's all about start with workable solutions. Don't worry too much about whether it is publishable or not. You start gaining confidence in your own ways in whatever area that you're working on. So look for workable solutions that can provide insights, however simple the insights are, however simple the problem is. Start somewhere, which is very manageable, very simple. After all, we have 3 to 4 years to sort of go through this journey. So there is no hurry to sort of jump somewhere and then see what to do and so on. Gain confidence and start relaxing the assumptions. You will find a beautiful model coming out. I think that's a very good research process. Starts with a very good set of research questions. But quite often what I find nowadays is there is this pressure of straight away setting up a model first. You do a structural equation model, or you start something with that. I think 40% of the research effort in a PhD, if you really ask me, is your ability to write a half a page, which may have 3 questions or maybe 4 questions that you want to answer. It's very important. We need to keep going back and ask, what are these 3 questions that I want to answer at the end of the day? How do you want to answer? Don't worry about all that. What are these 3 very interesting questions in the chosen domain that I want to answer? And get clarity, get convinced that these questions are worthwhile to answer. In my opinion, approximately 40% work is done in a PhD if we reach this stage. It's very important we spend that kind of a time even before we jump into. So I find today, you take a topic, then you go through a sort of a literature survey, and then you come with the ritual. These are the gaps that I found out, and then you write. I think don't get too much into the temptation. While they are required, we are going to do that. I think writing a half a page or a page of in the chosen domain, this is what I want to raise. These are the 3 interesting questions I want to ask. If that kind of an approach you take, the chances are that it guides you through the process. So I think that's a very, very important step in the research process. Another problem that we will go through, particularly as PhD scholars, everyone will share with you on this, is whether you like it or not, research is, or the PhD that you get is a light at the end of a long tunnel. There are stages where, we keep doing, and morning we come with an idea, oh, now I have found something very interesting. By about 4 o'clock in the evening, this problem has been solved. There is somebody who has already solved it any number of times, looked at that problem. I think this is a very interesting process. Don't lose your heart. There is a lot of value in this. And as you keep doing it, you will actually find that a time comes when you are able to even manage this process. That's the value of this whole idea. So is it a worthwhile topic? New topics are, of course, easily publishable. And so therefore, old topic, I find a lot of PhD scholars are working on topics which are old. And if you take a slightly older topic, it's going to be extremely difficult given the kind of publication pressures that we have today and so on. So one has to be very, very careful about it. Let me, the second question is, do I do analytical modeling? Do I do case study? Do I do one-off case? Or I do a content analysis? All kinds of questions come. That's why it's very important that half a page of write-up of those 2-3 questions is one which you can hold your hand very firmly. Otherwise, all these will swing you elsewhere. And you will end up in a situation where you do not know how to sort of handle issues that come up. More than telling how to choose a topic, I will tell you how not to choose a topic. I think that's much easier and much better than saying how to choose a topic. I have found some guidelines and some yardsticks in the last several years. But before that, and there are some things with which we should judge our own research work. In fact, all the papers presented today morning, you should really check these parameters with your papers. You will find your own. For example, in a couple of the papers, empirical generalization is very difficult. I found it was not happening. It was just a set of study on a set of data. The question that people will ask is how empirically general this is. The value of the paper is critically dependent on that. So there are 4 important parameters. First one is relatedness. You can't create a research out of vacuum. So how do you make a judgment for yourself that whatever results I find, it should not entirely match with the known result? Then there is a problem. You can't go to the other extreme. You can't go to this extreme also. You can't say, my results has nothing to do with what has happened in the last so many years. That's also a problem. And if you say all results that are already told, I have verified it, then the question is, then what did you do? So we need to understand on this plane, we have to find our own position on that. Transparency is very, very important. How easy it is for interpretation. How about intuitive confirmation, and where there are counterintuitive results, how well you are able to powerfully bring it to a conceptualization and so on. Robustness is very, very important, particularly if you do some analytical modeling. Robustness is extremely important. The value of the model and the insight is a function of how robust. What I mean by robust is you change some parameters, you perturb a few parameters. If the results are swinging wildly, then the quality of that work is severely compromised. It's not valued that much. So robustness is very important, and particularly in a business school research, empirical generalization is extremely important. because many of the business school research happens by observing a certain problem in an industry, in a sector, in a particular situation, which is a good way to start. It's a very good way to start, but that's not the way to end. Once you study a particular problem in certain amount of detail, then you come with a certain interpretation. If required, you build a model. I think the next step that we need to ask is, how can I ensure that while I took a particular example, a set of cases, and came with an idea, how did I make sure that I have made it, because that's the first question that will come. How empirically generalizable are your results? Because the value of the research is also a function of that. So broadly, to summarize these, I think 3 things we need to understand in the research publication process. First thing is, are you doing the right research? Second question is, are you doing the research rightly? Because sometimes you do the right research but in the wrong way. Again, you are gone. It is not going to go anywhere. Are you doing the research rightly? And the third thing is, are you able to share it in the right medium? If we are able to keep these 3 parameters and do many things and constantly check these, the propensity for us to convert our work into a publishable material is quite high. So I will elaborate on this as we go along. So doing right research is all about what is the topic of my research. Is it worthwhile to do this research? I have already spoken a little bit about that. All that I would do is to say what are some of the things that we should not be doing. Rather than saying what we should be doing, let me list a few things which we should not be doing, because that doesn't amount to right research. In fact, one of the problems I see with people is they beat a dead snake 1001th time. Don't do that. You know, there are people who come and tell me, sir, I am doing a work on TQM. TQM is as old as my grandfather, I think now. Because they come and say, sir, we are now studying TQM. Some lean from operations, I'm just giving a few examples. I think they're all a complete waste of time. That's not the way. In every area, I've been telling people sometimes when they come and talk to me, you have to be very, very careful about all these. It's very important for us to understand what are those 4 or 5 important conversations happening now, and what are the 4 or 5 important areas where potential conversations can happen 5 years from now. That's very, very important. These are all part of the research. So don't beat a dead snake 1001th time. You have very little hope of doing anything about publication. If you are unable to produce any new additional knowledge than what we already know, that research is of no value. See, these are the yardsticks we have to use when we come to a certain topic level and decide what we want to do. Saying something that is of no interest or use to anyone, that kind of research is very difficult to take forward anywhere. So we have to judge this element of our research. Is this having these kind of problems? Solving problems that has no relevance today. Contextual relevance is very important in a business school, particularly in a business school setting. You please don't solve problems which have no contextual relevance. That proportion is low. The proportion has to be much higher that you solve a contextually relevant problem. So I think this is another yardstick which we may want to sometimes keep and judge for ourselves. Are we okay with the topic that we have chosen? And methodology and the findings are not intellectually stimulating. At the end of the day, if the methodology and the findings are not intellectually stimulating, we again run the risk of the research topic that we have taken. So these are some of the yardsticks I think we must keep in mind and make sure that we make our own judgment in our own ways, of course, with our doctoral committee and the guide and all that. I think these are very important for us to make sure that after traveling so much down on the ground, we should not feel that there is something that has happened like this. Doing research rightly is more about research methodology more than anything, correct? And then also to say, do I have sufficient evidence to claim useful addition to the literature? And most importantly, the shelf life of research. I teach a course. I mean, I've stopped teaching it now. From 98, I used to teach a course on e-commerce, business models for e-commerce. Very early, I have done some work on e-commerce. And you may be surprised, when I am in Bangalore, I used to teach this course. The papers I use for my teaching in e-commerce are 1931 paper by a Nobel laureate called Ronald Coase, called Nature of a Firm. I use that paper to teach my, and there is a 1903 paper which is on price discrimination. I use that paper. There was 1984 paper, even before internet came, there was a paper by a group of MIT researchers on electronic markets and electronic hierarchies. Why am I saying this? Good research has a very long shelf life. We are not competing with daily newspapers and weekly magazines. Research must have shelf life. And I think that's the acid test for good research. And many of these Nobel laureate papers have shelf life. Market for Lemons, 1970, Akoff's paper. Again, I use it in my e-commerce course, which I teach in 2010 and so on. It's very important for us to understand that this is a good acid test for whether our methodology and the insights are good enough. Shelf life is very, very important. And that is, of course, judged in course of time. But if you do a few things, perhaps the shelf life is more. So I think there are 5 parameters to address this. Are we doing the research rightly? Okay. One is the motivation for research. How have we motivated the problem? How have we brought to the table that this problem is worth studying? Motivation. Okay, all these will get into publication. Finally, the publication is going to be judged. I'll repeat all these parameters in a different way when it comes to publication. Okay. Methodological rigor, ability to obtain new insights, scope for empirical generalization, which I already talked about, and the shelf life. So it's very important, particularly when it comes to writing our research into a paper. It is very important, please remember all the time, that it is the responsibility of an author to sell the paper. The referee is not interested, the readers are not interested, the chief editor is not interested. Interested in the sense they don't have any personal interest as such. But an author must have a personal interest that my paper has value. You have to market your paper and bring it to a level so that people are going to take it for publication. That's why all these are important. We need to worry about why do we need this study? Have we thought about that? Have we exclusively brought that idea into what we are doing as part of our research, which eventually becomes part of publication in some ways? Who is going to be benefited by this study? Can we be very unambiguous in that? This study addresses this constituency for this reason, or this is the kind of issue we are raising. This is the kind of thing, how unambiguous we are in terms of stating that, and in what way will the potential stakeholders be benefited. These are issues which judge the motivation of why this paper may be valuable, why this research work may be valuable. Methodological rigor is all about saying, how do we get convinced, how do we make people, right from the referee up to the reader, get convinced that the work is genuine? Because this is the biggest question that I have. I mean, you come up and put some results, then how do I judge? I can't take the results on face value. It's not possible. That's where the methodological rigor plays a very important role. How am I going to convince that the work is genuine? Whatever we are talking about is verified and repeated. Not repeated by somebody else. I think it's not repeated. It's not repeated by. How will the study lead to reliable results? All these are very important. So methodology is not for the sake of methodology. Because that way, there is so many tools available. We can say, I use this methodology, that statistics, I plug this in and plug that out, and all that we can say. I think the basic idea behind all that is to say my work is genuine, it is verifiable, and it is reliable, and it can be repeated. Repeatable meaning I can try your methodology if possible and ensure that the results will come the same way. If you are able to provide room for it, the methodological rigor stands on its own. In whatever ways it is possible, it provides that kind of a value to the work. Well, there are many things about these new insights, and these are some of the pointers which we should keep. Are you opening a new conversation altogether in the chosen area of research? That's one way you can actually get new insights. This is one methodology. Or have you started a new stream of work that was non-existent? This whole work called service-dominated logic, which started in 2007, is a wholesome new work. The 11 foundational premises which they brought in has completely opened up a whole era of discussion. For next 15-20 years, we are going to work on it very clearly. That's an example. Is it possible we can get, or you talk about sustainable business, green, and so on, perhaps there may be opportunities to open a new conversation altogether. So we need to look for that kind of possibilities when we are talking about research and publication. Can we, otherwise, another possibility is, can we challenge an accepted belief about something and bring new perspectives? This is another way to sort of make sure that there are new insights, provide some counterintuitive findings of an existing idea, or show a new method. In 1989, me and one of my colleagues, we wrote a paper. And we wrote a paper on, it's called a group technology problem. And we wrote a paper, group technology research started in 1952. In 1989, we actually wrote a paper, and the paper was straight accepted. We were initially worried. Something 35 years people have been working, we were writing a paper, straight they accepted. Because we actually showed in that paper that forget about all these complex mathematics with which you have to solve the group technology problem. We used a textbook model called assignment model, which is taught in basic OR. We used that model, and then we just said we can solve this problem. So we actually, a very old problem, we were very comfortably able to show that it can be solved using a methodology. 2003, I published a paper on what is called reverse supply chain. Again, in fact, the value of that paper, which was studied, again accepted with very little, revision, was simple. I said, don't use complex math. In fact, reverse supply chain is very complex. Forward supply chain is much easier. You know exactly where the computer goes. Reverse supply chain, you don't know, because I buy this computer and then I go and change my address half a dozen times. Finally, one day I want to junk the computer in some corner of the city. There is a product take-back regulation, which has still not come to India, but is there in Germany and all those places. If I leave this Toshiba computer on the curbside, Toshiba will be sued. I will not be sued. There is a product take-back regulation, which means the reverse supply chain is so complex, I have to keep track of what is happening. So such a complex problem, inventory control problem, I said use a textbook. I used my textbook and said use this model. I'll tell you how to use this model to solve a reverse supply chain problem. They accepted the paper without much, that could be a very nice way to solve problems. Today people are not asking for complex maths or complex English. They say, can you give a very nice insight? Can you give some very interesting things which we are willing to sort of look at? So that is another way one can actually give a new methodology of solving an existing problem that can become interesting. These are some of the things we should look for when we try to sort of do our research. Empirical generalization, I have already talked about that. So in some ways, to me, there are only two parameters for good research. The first one is a good research invariably is a function of asking good questions. That's why I say 40% time you must spend only on getting you should not rush into your research problem. Enormous effort must go into it. You should go back to the drawing board, back and forth and so on. Those half a page of those 3-4 questions that we ask can be very, very valuable. That can be really the starter for a good research, which must result in a certain kind of a shelf life for that paper that we are writing. To me, these are the two important parameters for doing the research rightly, if you have to really ask me. Then I'll talk about the last issue, which is the right medium, where now that we say we do a research, now comes the publication part of it. And the question is, what are the challenges there? So I would want to only share as an editor for the last 10, 12 years in a few journals, very intensively in 2 journals. All my experiences that I have, I want to just share as to what has happened, sitting on this side, receiving all these papers, and what has happened, and what can we learn from that. So I want to share that thought with you, because I think as the publication pressure goes and more people getting into the publication racket, I think the bar is rising and these issues gets even more sharper now. First of all, the issue of publishing from India. People tell me that, sir, it is very difficult to publish from India. I don't accept this. As late as 2 years back, 3 years back, I could just study the ISKCON's midday meal scheme, Akshay Patra. In Bangalore, there is a huge operation. It was a huge challenge. There are about 2 kitchens, one near IA in Bangalore, one 20 kilometers away. near the kitchen near IIM Bangalore had about 650 schools to which the food has to be cooked and sent. The problem was 2 o'clock in the morning, every day they start cooking. But at least 10% schools, which is about 50 schools, the food was not reaching during the lunch break. I mean, this hurts everyone because the person who got up at 2 o'clock in the morning and put so much effort to cook is feeling bad. The truck driver who carried the meal to the school feels bad. And at the end of the day, the kids have not had their food. They have gone back post-lunch into their class. And the second thing is 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock, food becomes stale. So there is this issue of food safety also. So I actually solved that problem. With 2 of my regular MBA students, we could publish it in a very good journal. So this publishing from India is difficult. Don't buy this argument. If you can have a good, interesting problem, you can have a very good methodological rigor. I don't see this at all as an issue. Never buy this argument. It is difficult to publish. Nobody wants Indian data. I don't buy this argument. The issues are much deeper than that. The issues are fundamental. If you address those issues, in fact, they're allowed to have India-related data, India-related problems, and so on. So I don't think you should worry about that. India is really unfolding as an interesting destination because there is so much of Chinese papers which are done. Even in an area of spirituality where I am working in the last 10 years, Buddhism, mindfulness are all over. They are now asking for Indian. We are not still ready to sort of publish papers on it, but they are ready. So there is enough possibility to publish from here with a good data, with a good methodology. Very easily we can sail through, notwithstanding all these problems. I just want to assure you that first. But the problem which I see is our track record. When I say our track record, I am talking about the academic community, the whole country, not just here and there. Understand, as an academic community, we have a problem in this country. One is our quantity is not up to the mark. I find Iranians and Koreans and Chinese 20-fold they are publishing. You cannot match them in quantity. Of course, quality is the other issue. I'm saying even on quantity we cannot match. But on quality is definitely there are issues. So we have seemed to have both the problems. We seem to have problems in quantity. We seem to have problems in quality because for some reason we seem to be frog in the well. We seem to be happy attending. And India is one country in which we have started international journal and then there are 4 or 5 words of nonsense after that. Volume 1, number 1, you will publish. Volume 1, number 2, I will publish. And this is what Indian academics believe they can beat the UGC system of journal and all that. This is purely a frog in the well syndrome. If that's the way we want to do research, I mean, the choice we can make. But if we want to really do meaningful research, there is scope. There are ways by which we can do. There is enough that ground that we have, even with Indian data, we will be able to go. So generally, if you look at a top journal, what would happen is 80 to 85% of the submissions will go through what I call it as desk reject. You will, in 3 days, a week, you will get a nice letter. Thank you, your work is interesting. However, it is not aligned to our, something they will write. Basically, what it means is, it has not passed through the first level. Many of them are genuine. Some of them may not be genuine, but by and large, there is still truth in what is being done. So there is a 80% submission which are rejected at the first stage itself, which means we hear within 10 days or a week or so, which I call it as desk reject. Then there is a 10% which is rejected after the first round of refereeing, because the 2 referees or 3 referees, 2 out of the 3 or all that, they say this is not a publishable quality, so it's gone. So we have now 10% more. 5% actually give up the process because they find this whole process is going nowhere either, or it is asking things which is not possible. It's either ways. It goes nowhere, or it's just too much for me to manage. So the authors themselves just give up. That's 5%. Remaining 5%. So the number 5 can go up to 3, 2, or 1 also. It all depends on what is the journal that we are talking about. But by and large, 5, 4, 3% is what finally gets published. So the question, therefore, is what is the issue here? What is so unusual about it? Are the editors so unkind and they're sort of doing it deliberately? Because these kind of talks also happen. Sometimes we keep thinking like that. And is there a problem? And how do we address this problem? So I have experienced this as editor for nearly 7-8 years. So I want to share 4-5 dominant patterns which I have seen, which I think happens quite often. And so I want to sensitize those to you, because that's where I think we need to work on. I've already spoken about it partly in the earlier part of the presentation, because that only manifests again in the later part. But still, let me go through it. I think the clinching deal for a paper is you have to ask, does this paper have a publishable seed at all or not? Don't, this is a judgment you have to make, maybe with your guide, with your supervisor, whatever. It's extremely important for us to ask this question, because if there is no publishable seed, it's not going to go anywhere. Now, what is we're all doing and thinking and so on? Finally, after a while, this was going on for some time, and whatever thoughts came, I actually made a two-dimensional, two-part framework of some thoughts which were going in my mind. The question was simple. Question was, there are B2B electronic markets. There are different types of markets being talked about: reverse auction, private marketplace, forward auctions, and so many things. Exchanges and online exchanges and so on. There was this question which we have been talking, how to make sense of it. As a buyer, do I get here or do I get there? When do I use this? When do I use? Otherwise, it's all fine. You can keep on throwing jargon after jargon. How do you actually understand this? So this was a thought and thing going on. So after a while, once I made a two-part way of trying to make sense of it. And I'm sorry. So I made a sort of a table, and I showed to some of my colleagues. Just I was curious, and invariably all of them said, "Madhavan, there is a very nice, it looks very interesting, why don't you write?" Many said that. When I showed to many of them, invariably they said, "This looks very interesting, why don't you just write it? I think it looks very interesting." I was a bit encouraged. Foolishly, otherwise I do not know, but I said, then so many of my colleagues are saying this is very interesting. I sat down and then started writing this paper. And this was the only paper in my entire 30 years of publishing was accepted without any revision by California Management Review. It was a single author paper just published in 2003. And the genesis of that was those two tables. I showed the table to quite a few colleagues. They said, they all invariably said, this is interesting. That encouraged me that maybe there is something here. It proved to be true. So what I am saying is that judgment you make. You make a judgment for yourself that this really, and these are all judgments which you have to make very, very rigorously. Very ruthlessly you have to make. Because if you are not making that judgment, there is a team of people who are going to make that judgment ruthlessly. So you better make. Rather than letting it to a referee, to an editor or a referee, you make that judgment as an author, because that is a much better way of actually solving this problem. So, many of these are things which we need to actually ask. What is it that we are bringing to the table? And if you are quite convinced, because your paper at the end of the day, you may write some 15 pages. Whether it is publishable is based on a particular insight or something that you bring. That is the core, that is the kernel. If you get the kernel, you can work around it. So you have to make sure before you write a paper, I am convinced there is a kernel to this paper, which appears interesting. That's what I mean by saying, check whether there is a publishable seed. Suppose if you say there is a publishable seed, then we can start working on many things. And the way referees will probably look at is to say, what are the new ideas and insights that this paper really offers? In fact, in my experience, I find a number of papers which were rejected were for these two reasons. Authors merely collected well-known facts and presented them in several paragraphs. A good chunk of the paper was like that. They collected so many facts and then put them in the paper. That doesn't make a paper for you. Or very little coverage on issues and challenges. There is so much of work they say, but they don't really take it to the next step and saying, what are the issues that, these are the two reasons which I have found in many of the papers. They had referees have been able to say, no, this is not something which is worthwhile. In all this business school based research, I find another problem when they write a paper. Unwittingly, the description about a case or a group of cases that are taken for studies and so on occupies a sizable chunk. As a thumb rule, it cannot cross 15%. Whereas papers which are rejected, it is anywhere up to 40 to 50%, which means half the paper is some storytelling of I went to this company, we did. We have to be very, very careful. Please understand, a paper is a real estate space. You have to know it is a real estate space. You cannot afford to waste it just like that. So that is the charm of writing. You may have a lot of things to say. I mean, that's a challenge as a researcher we face. We have too much information and so many things we want to say, but nobody has that kind of a space. So this is another problem I have seen personally, that too much description, little more than what ought to be. As a thumb rule, you should not cross 15%. In some cases, it may be probably 20%, which means we are talking about a 20% is very high. Just imagine, it's a 30-page paper, we're talking of, 6 to 7 million, that's quite a lot. Even that is too much. That's why I'm saying these numbers, you have to understand this very clearly. After you write the paper, you review the paper first. You list down and you very objectively and ruthlessly list down that are there any insights and ideas that I have provided? Don't wait for the referee. You do the review. You sit down and then go over it a few times and you pencil down in a piece of paper and read and see whether it is worthwhile. Keep the paper. Take these jotted notes and you ask yourself, is this something which is interesting enough for me to publish? Please ask that kind of a question. Then the chances are we have not missed this particular aspect. So if there is a clinching deal of a publishable seed, then the next thing that a referee would look for to make a judgment is, does this paper really offer new ideas and insights? So you also sort of do that check. If you cross this hurdle, or if you are able to reasonably cover this ground, let us say, then comes the question is, how well have you motivated the problem? In other words, why am I doing this study? We can't just do a study because we thought this is interesting, so therefore let me study. I don't think that's going to work like that. We need to sort of convince that this is an issue which really will bring a very interesting case. This is some issue which is, we say, please understand, I don't talk about gaps in literature. This is a ritual. You write a literature review and come with a 3-bulleted, therefore the literature. I'm not talking about that. I am saying you really ask with your results and your analysis, what is it that you have actually studied? What is it that you are plugging in? So what do readers gain by studying this? Who is likely to be benefited? And what kind of benefits they are going to get? These questions are to be answered in the paper. You might have done it in the research, but you have to get this. This should be the end of the first section of your paper. In the first section of your paper, you should be able to get this quickly. Only then they are going to read the section 2 and section 3 and so on. You have to say, this is what it is. Here is a very interesting issue that we need to address, because that only will increase the shelf life of the article and so on. And it is again better that we ask these questions ahead of the referees so that we are sort of prepared on that. Yeah. The third is the methodological rigor, which I talked about. And many of the papers that were rejected had a high dose of unwittingly personal opinions. This is a trend which I have seen in a lot of Indian authors. They collect some survey or some research, some case study, something they do. All that is described. Then there is a section called, implications and something that doesn't come out of this. I don't know from where is it coming. But they write things which are not connected with what you have done. Now then, why have you done all this? Suddenly from nowhere you seem to get some gyan of what these findings of the study. We don't think about it at times. when we write, there are so many thoughts come to us. And all that I'm saying is we have to get these thoughts back onto the table, connect all these logically and see what should go in, what should get out. Because the problem that we will face is we are too much involved in that work. And there are so many things which we actually studied and gathered. Now we are trying to write it in from 10 pages, 15 pages. That's why this problem is coming. I'm not even really saying, I'm not suspecting your, ethical issue or anything of that kind. It is just that in our anxiety, we want to say this, but we don't realize this is not connecting to the other. All that which are not connected cannot be told. However, right, you have to give the whole connection. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So, conclusions are neither argued well, not arrived at properly. These are all the examples why papers are rejected. I have seen high proportions are on this side. We must describe how the methodology is rigorous. It is again the job of an author. You have to very tactically buy in the referees that my methodology is rigorous. You should not assume. You should be able to devote a little section to actually convince that my methodology is indeed rigorous. You have to sell yourself through the paper. And one other biggest problem is the assumptions. Even in today's morning, I could have actually asked quite a few questions on many of the assumptions. Of course, Professor Rao asked some of them for want of time, more in terms of sort of helping. But please understand, whether you do a mathematical work, in fact, whether you do a statistical work, please understand statistical work is garbage in, garbage out. Anything you put into SPSS, you will get your own answer finally. Please understand that. It's very, very tricky. You can put any amount of data into it, you will always get a regression, you will get these, all that you will get. You will find people who are all hungry also watching movie. You can come to a correlation that, hungry people actually watch movie, or after movie watching you become hungry or something. All that you can say. You have to be very, very careful about these kind of things. So it is, a few questions were asked around that in the previous session. Point I'm trying to make is two things, misconception. One is people don't give enough attention to boldly and rightly say you have to say your assumption. Some people say, let us not say the assumption, it is very hard. You must say your assumption and you must be able to justify your assumption. That is the tact of your research. You should be able to say why, although you should read some of the nice papers, they say that. They say, although this assumption is restrictive, under these conditions, it provides this kind of insights, therefore it is useful. So you have to say that. You have to say it is restrictive, but because it is giving this kind of a result, it is worthwhile to look at it. And because it is restrictive, you don't say it, a referee is going to pick that assumption and he is going to say, I don't agree with you, this is too hard assumption, I don't need this paper anymore. So it is not that we should not say our assumptions if it is restrictive. We must be able to say. We must be able to argue why with that restrictive assumption we can still get good insights, and therefore it is worthwhile to look at the work in its current format. This is another major problem which I find, that the assumptions part is not very well articulated. There are quite often some loose ends in the methodological issues. We have to be very conscious of it. We should be able to plug the loose ends. Sometimes we unwittingly leave it little loose. That is a possibility for, please understand, a referee is actually seeing how to reject your paper, not how to accept your paper. Most referees work like that. They find out how to reject your paper. It's like an IIM CAT exam. We don't select, we only eliminate. Our selection methodology is not selection, it is only elimination. Because what remains is selected. The same way, referee also says that I will find a ground to reject. If I am not able to find a ground to reject, the paper is in. In some ways, that is how it happens actually. So if you give that mousetrap, you are trapped. That's why all these are very important for us to close the loose ends. If that part is taken care, then there is a last part of this whole publication process, which I call it as gaining confidence. And what I mean by that is, after all that, there is a publishable seed. Of course, methodological rigor is there, some interesting insights seem to be there, and so on and so forth. Then the question is, how do we gain the confidence of the editor and the referees? Well, it is all about creating a certain impression in the minds of the reader and the referee and the editor. And how do we do it? We have to be very, very conscious of the kind of references that we put in. So again, I find, 2 years back, there was a paper, California Management Review gave it to me. Just to give you an example. There was a paper, California Management Review gave it to me 4 or 5 years back. There was some big thing happening in eBay. What was happening in eBay was, eBay has this methodology of ranking a seller and a buyer. So there are people in the US who get a very high rating on seller. That was a paper, nice paper. Very high rating on seller. What do? They give $1 music, $1 zodiac, all small little picture and things like that. They get a 5 on 5 rating. So some star seller or some such kind of a rating. Then what they do, this paper analyzed that. Then I don't know how they got the data. Then what they do is, after they got such a nice rating, they actually put a high value item for sale in eBay and cheat the buyer. That case was analyzed. Data, with actual data. I don't know whether eBay commissioned that research, I have no idea. So that paper was sent. Now what was happening was, if you look at the references, I was stunned by looking at the references. The references where he's talking about eBay, electronic procurement and all that. The references, the latest reference was 1978. After that, I found no reference in the list of references. I don't know how they, and I'm not saying it is required all the time. But if you're talking about e-commerce and eBay and all that, so much of water is flowing under the bridge in the last 5-6 years. And many people have looked at it. I don't know how these paper completely ignored all the literature. Then even on that set of literature which they was shown, there were gaping holes. So the rejection of the paper, revision in the first place, one of the reason was this paper is not informed of some of the results which they could have employed it, and because some of the results were also, the problem was interesting, the methodological rigor was not good, and this confidence was not there because the references were all over the place. Some of the very important references were part of the referee report, saying these results have not been ignored, they have been overlooked. Some of these results would have, so we said resubmit again. Finally, the paper did not find its way into the journal. What I'm saying, this is very important. Sometimes it is not, please understand, it is not that you should have 100 references. It's not that you should have 40 references. I'm not meaning that. Are the most relevant, important things, are you able to give that feeling to the referee? I am in the field where some important events are happening. How do we make that statement? That's where the list of references is very, very important. Yeah. So review the list of references for glaring omissions. Too few unrelated and dated references, it can be another source for a resubmission or a rejection in times and so on and so forth. Think about that. And it's always a good practice to get opinion from a peer researcher. Somehow in this country, this practice is not much there. I think there is a terrific value if you can share your work with this is all the time the practice elsewhere. Somehow we are still not there. It's a very good practice that you share with fellow researchers. Good ideas will come. In fact, in my personal professional experience, I have had 2-3 authors coming in because they have done wonderful addition to the paper when I sent to them. And I said, can I have you as a third author? Because you added something significantly. One paper which I published a few years back, one person from Amsterdam School of Business gave a wonderful, I said, you must be part of it. In all fairness, this has added value to the paper. I think we should benefit like that. I think we should not hesitate. We will be able to improve. And sometimes if there is one more author, good enough. What is there? I think if there is a good work and so on. And if you can do all these, because to write a paper without no references, Peter Drucker will write once in a while like that. Not everybody can, you can't shake the world every now and then, because the world cannot afford shaking that often. It will become an earthquake then. Once in a while you can shake the world, which means, no references, you can write a paper, start a new area of research and all that. I think as a good rule, we must make sure that this is also a lens which we keep very closely and look at what's happening. I'll end with just one more slide, which is after you send a paper, when you get the R&R, you resubmit the referee report, you rewrite and resubmit. There are some interesting challenges there. So I will share a couple of ways to handle that, because they are also very important. Until the paper is accepted, it's still not there, right? But before that, I have also found in the Indian authors these issues, which are quite often there. We tend to be too wordy. It's an Asian phenomenon and particularly an Indian phenomenon. In fact, I must give you again my personal experience. That paper which I mentioned, 2003 California Management Review paper, 5,500 words was 5,700 words was version 1, which I was satisfied. But I said this is not okay. I took a pencil and a rubber and hid myself into my library. I brought it down to 3,900 words. My professor used to say, when I was a PhD student, my professor used to say, Mahadevan, if you write with fewer words, it will be piercing, it will be more impactful. It took a while for me to get that style of writing. We tend to write actually too descriptive, too wordy. Why I am saying this? Every paper you have written and its final format, before sending it, slaughter it once with a pencil and a rubber, keep and say, should I need necessarily this sentence? Can I strike it off? Can I take a few words out of it? You will find it will become much sharper. The paper will look much sharper. Try to write a paper which is smaller in terms of the number of words, not in terms of content. What I mean is Asians, particularly Indians, are too wordy. This is our inherent problem because English is not our native language. So better you think about it. After writing a paper, give all your best foot forward to bring the paper to 2/3 of the size of the paper. You will see that paper will be much sharper. If possible, try it. It will be much better to read. It will be much sharper. Please try it. Our usage patterns are a bit confusing because English is not our native language. Koreans are even worse. Chinese are even worse. Still, they seem to be publishing actually somehow. So we can always, if possible, co-author with a person with a native language of English. It really sometimes increases needless confusions that are coming out of paper. These are all for the experienced publishers. We should have really people with other thing also. Okay, now comes the issue of how do you manage the referees? Okay, this is again a very important issue, and over long years of publishing, you will actually get here. 20% of the papers are actually rejected simply because we did not know how to handle the referees. We had a good problem in our hand. We had a publishable seed, everything we had. We didn't know how to handle the referees. That's also an art. We have to get that. Otherwise, the work is good, but it will not be published. There is an art of handling the referees which we have to do. First thing, it's not that all the time we need to agree to everything that the referee says. I don't think there is a rule like that. You may think like that. Many times it may be true, but it's not 100% true. You can refute the referee's arguments. There's a way to refute it, and it is possible if you can do it. Sometimes it works to your advantage. It doesn't work to your disadvantage. It doesn't happen too often, but I have had in my own long years of publishing, I have had these experiences. I have been able to refute in my own ways with the supportive thing. The editor has finally taken a call on that. So I don't always think you have to, whatever the referee, because sometimes referees are some. In fact, the worst case could be you are in the second round. First round you are submitted. Some referee comments have come, referee A and B. A said something, B said something. So you sort of try to address that. Then you resubmit it. And in second round, A and B say something, A intersection B is null set.